Coming up on Primetime News. Having pledged to take the initiative in a fund to help boost youth employment, President Park Geun-hye decides to donate about $17,000 to the fund. Central Committee members of South Korea's main opposition party passed reform measures designed to boost flagging support after a series of election defeats. And as speculation lingers over whether North Korea's nuclear threats are real or not, the regime continues its provocations, saying the U.S. is the reason behind the Korean peninsula's escalating tensions. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello and welcome to Primetime News on this Wednesday, September 16th. I'm Hwang Ji-hye.
And I'm Daniel Choy. Thank you for joining us. Our top story: to get more people chipping in to help a new fund aimed at creating more jobs for young people in the country. Korea's president leads by example. President Park Geun-hye will donate 20 million won, or roughly $17,000 out of her own pocket to the fund, hoping it will lead to more contributions from leaders of both the public and private sectors. Our Hwang Sung-hee starts us off.
$17,000. That's how much President Park Geun-hye will donate to a new fund aimed at helping young job seekers. Prime Minister Hwang Kyo-ahn said during a meeting with other cabinet ministers on Wednesday that the president will also give 20% of her monthly pay to the fund every month. That comes out to roughly 3.2 million won, or $2,700 per month. The Prime Minister said he and other ministers will also follow suit.
We will try to expand voluntary contributions from the leaders of society, as well as the public and private sectors.
Nearly 1 out of 10 people between the ages of 15 and 29 were unemployed as of August, as companies remain reluctant to hire new workers amid the slowing economy. The fund, dubbed the Youth Hope Fund, was introduced by President Park at Tuesday's cabinet meeting. It is expected to be used for running social programs such as tailored training for youth. The government plans to establish a foundation within this year for the management of the new fund, with the hope that it will open up new opportunities to struggling young job seekers. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
The 70th meeting of the United Nations General Assembly has kicked off. Some 160 world leaders are participating in this year's session. And South Korean President Park Geun-hye is one of them, and she's expected to focus on earning international support to prevent any further provocations from North Korea. Our Lee Ji-won reports.
The 70th United Nations General Assembly kick-started in New York on Tuesday. About 160 world leaders, including U.S. President Barack Obama, Chinese President Xi Jinping, and even the Pope, are attending the meeting, marking the highest attendance of dignitaries in UN history.
It's my great honor to open the 70th session of the General Assembly of the United Nations. A session which I hope will be truly historic. A session not just of groundbreaking decisions, but one of much-needed concerted action for people and for planet.
The UN General Assembly convenes every year to tackle issues of global concern and oversee the budget of the international organization. This year's assembly will see the adoption of the post-2015 development agenda and the follow-up to the UN's Millennium Development Goals, which were set 5 years ago, as well as the adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. South Korean President Park Geun-hye is also expected to attend the General Assembly, as well as the UN Development Summit, where she will deliver a keynote speech. President Park will participate on the 26th in a high-level meeting of the Global Education First Initiative, as well as a special event about South Korea's Semaul movement, co-organized by the South Korean government, the UN, and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. On the 27th, President Park will preside over the interactive session of the UN Development Summit with Chilean President Michelle Bachelet. On the 28th, President Park will give another keynote speech in the general debate on key issues of this year's General Assembly. Amid the possibility that North Korea may test fire a long-range rocket next month, President Park's itinerary is being closely watched by the international community. 이지원, Arirang News.
And as North Korea points to Washington for creating the possible nuclear crisis on the Korean peninsula, the White House says it would be unwise for Pyongyang to carry out any nuclear tests or launch missiles. Our Connie Kim tells us more.
Coming on the heels of North Korea's threats to carry out a fourth nuclear test, the reclusive regime blames the United States for the nuclear crisis on the Korean peninsula. North Korea's state-run Nodong-Shinmun said on Wednesday, Washington has always been the destroyer of peace and the escalator of tensions in the two Koreas. It then threatened an arms clash on the peninsula will lead to a sea of fire on the U.S. continent. And with Pyongyang's hinting of possible provocations, the United States continues calls for the North to refrain from actions that aggravate regional tensions. Calling on Pyongyang to focus on fulfilling international obligations and commitments, White House spokesman Josh Earnest said Tuesday that Washington will not accept North Korea as a nuclear state. Earnest emphasized Washington will continue to cooperate with the members of the six-party talks, enabling the North to carry out its promise made during the talks in 2005. That's when Pyongyang pledged to end its nuclear weapons program. The White House view was also echoed by U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Daniel Russell on the same day. Russell said it would be a mistake if North Korea conducts a nuclear or missile test, as it would set back the regime's hopes to grow its economy and end its isolation. The remarks coming from Washington come as Pyongyang warned it would use its nuclear weapons should the U.S. and its allies continue making hostile comments about North Korea. Adding to concerns, the reclusive regime hinted on Monday of another possible rocket launch in the near future. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
South Korea responds to North Korea's growing aggressive overtones by intensifying surveillance at sea. Military sources in Seoul say an Aegis destroyer has been given an official command to detect possible ballistic missile launches. One destroyer is currently deployed in the East Sea. One additional Aegis is set to be deployed if military activities in the north show a launch is imminent. A multifunctional radar built on all four sides of the Aegis destroyer can detect ballistic missiles 1,000 kilometers away and can also simultaneously track 1,000 flying targets within a 500-kilometer range. So the big question now is, will the reclusive regime defy all the criticisms coming from the U.S. and really go ahead and conduct a nuclear test? Well, our Han Daeun turned to some North Korean experts to give us some clues.
North Korea's series of threats to launch a long-range missile and to forge ahead with a nuclear test is almost becoming an annual event. Many South Koreans are immune to such repeated patterns of threat-for-bargain claims, but as unpredictable as North Korea is, no one knows for sure whether the reclusive regime would execute its proclaimed intent. So what will happen this year? While experts remain largely divided, some argue Pyongyang is unlikely to actually launch a long-range missile nor conduct a fourth nuclear test for some very specific reasons.
The announcement was made by a director-level aerospace specialist, not by high-ranking political officials. And unlike in the past, North Korea has not specified the time and place of the possible launch in detail. Also, they still appear to be in the final stages of setting up its new satellite system, meaning the launch can't come anytime soon.
Many experts also point to the international circumstances the isolated state is in as one strong reason why it's unlikely to implement these or further provocations.
Young leader Kim Jong-un is in need of an armed protest for diplomatic bargaining, as well as for domestic purposes. But with greater pressure coming from China, on top of mounting international criticisms, I think it will be difficult for the North to carry out its provocations in reality.
North Korea watchers in Seoul add that Pyongyang is trying to send a message of complaint to the international stage ahead of the planned US-China summit set for next Friday. Han Daeun, Arirang News.
A South Korean inspection team set off its two-day visit to the north on Wednesday in preparation for next month's reunions of families separated by the Korean War. The team, made up of 14 members of technicians and Unification Ministry officials, is expected to look over venues around the Mount Kumgang Resort, where the reunions are set to take place. The South Korean Red Cross also started to work on verifying the whereabouts of 200 family members listed by North Korea. The two Koreas will exchange a final list of 100 family members from each side early next month.
Seoul's afternoon and evening commute was greatly affected today as two construction cranes fell onto the tracks of the Seoul subway, injuring 3. The incident happened in the Incheon area between Bupyeong and Baegun stations around 2:30 in the afternoon on Wednesday. The cranes were from a building site of an apartment next to the tracks, and they toppled over as one was being put together. Trains from both directions between Bupyeong and Incheon stations were stopped, but the tracks are now partially cleared.
In local politics, the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy adopted new reform initiatives at a Central Committee meeting on Wednesday. According to our Kim Young-gil, the move is part of its efforts to resolve internal feuds and reverse the party's declining popularity.
Nearly 400 members were present at the MPAD's Central Committee meeting to approve reforms that center on adopting a new nomination process ahead of next year's general elections. The proposals call for an electoral committee of non-party members to nominate candidates for the next parliamentary elections, and including women and the handicapped in the nomination process. With the reform plan endorsed, MPAD chief Moon Jae-in said it was time to end the internal strife and move forward.
Innovation starts from now on. Our party will strive to achieve internal reforms systematically and change the party's culture to make fundamental reforms. We will bring the opposition forces together so that we can gain victory in the upcoming general elections.
Previously, Moon had put his position at stake by threatening to resign if the reform initiative failed to pass the committee meeting, which was in short also a confidence vote in his leadership. However, controversy still surrounds the vote as members of the minority faction within the party refuse to participate. When asked, the non-mainstream members emphasized that the party's new reform plans fail to touch upon the essence of the party's innovation motives. Moon's opponents claim that such an overhaul is designed to favor his followers in picking candidates, and that the party's mainstreamers led by Chief Moon are trying to use the reforms to further their own political agendas. Although Moon has renewed the confidence in his chairmanship through Wednesday's vote, chances are high that non-mainstreamers will defect from the party to form their own coalition. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
Bills aimed at revising Korea's labor laws have been submitted to the Parliamentary Proceedings Bureau this afternoon. This comes after lawmakers from Korea's ruling Saenuri Party chose to push ahead with 5 major revisions to the related law. The changes include revisions to the Labor Standard Act, Employment Insurance Act, and the Act on the Protection of Fixed-Term and Part-Time Employees. With the revisions, the ruling party says it hopes to shorten employee working hours and also maybe the changes will help prolong the terms of fixed-term and part-time contracts and also shore up unemployment benefits for those temporarily out of work.
The world is waiting on the Federal Reserve's decision whether it would lead to raising interest rates in the U.S. for the first time in about a decade. But with markets still suffering from China's downturn, a growing number of economists expect the rate to remain unchanged. Our Kim Min-ji reports.
All eyes are on the U.S. Federal Reserve. Many analysts are shifting to a rate freeze this month from a previous consensus expectations of a rate hike. The U.S. dollar fell to a 3-year low against a basket of major currencies on Monday, which Reuters attributed to investors betting on interest rates staying at their record lows until at least December. Around 46% of economists surveyed by the Wall Street Journal in September expected a rate hike, which is down sharply from 82% in August. Barclays also ruled out prospects for a rate hike, with analysts pushing back their call for an increase to March next year.
Raising interest rates for the first time in 11 years is always going to be a big deal when it happens. I think it's unlikely, though, that we are actually going to see it delivered upon this week.
The main concern is that a rate increase could exacerbate the weak global economy. Some worry it could send further turbulence across global financial markets already hit by China's currency devaluation and possibly spark a financial crisis. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank have also voiced concerns about a global slowdown, suggesting the Fed hold off for the time being. However, some analysts say U.S. economic fundamentals are strong enough to support a rate increase, with a handful of U.S. policymakers saying it's time to align the monetary policy with economic progress.
It's the U.S. actually having to decide whether it is more concerned with its own economy or its position in the world.
As things stand, it's unclear what the decision will be. If the Fed decides to make its move, it would bring an end to its loose monetary policy in place since the 2008 global financial crisis and signal that the Fed is confident the U.S. economy is on the right track. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Global credit ratings agency Standard & Poor's downgrades Japan's sovereign rating by one notch from AA- to A+. The agency said Wednesday that the government's strategy to boost the economy, dubbed Abenomics, is unlikely to turn around the country's sluggish economic prospects. Japan is struggling with near-zero inflation rate and a shrinking GDP in the previous quarter. With the latest move, all three major global credit ratings agencies, Moody's, Fitch, and S&P, put Korea's sovereign rating higher than that of Japan.
For 45 years, the Saemaul-undong, or the New Village movement, has propelled Korea's modernization and it is now spreading to other countries as a model for sustainable development. With global Saemaul leaders attending a forum in Korea, an international organization has been launched. Here's Oh Soo-young with part 2 of the Saemaul-undong series.
Korea is one of the world's poorest countries in the years following the end of the Korean War. The Saemaul-undong movement has since been credited with putting Korea on the path to becoming the modern and relatively wealthy nation it is today. Launched by the government in 1970, it inspired community development based on diligence, self-help and cooperation. Villagers toiled together to build new roads and infrastructure. They also undertook agricultural reforms. Spreading from village to village, Saemaul's can-do spirit quickly became a nationwide movement. In under a decade, Korea's per capita income spiked more than fivefold, hitting more than $1,500. The country also achieved significant growth in health, education, industry and transportation. Since then, Korea has been helping other countries build their own Saemaul villages by training leaders, sharing technology and setting up the necessary infrastructure. Now leaders and experts from 60 countries are paying homage to the movement at the Global Saemaul-undong Forum. They're showing the Saemaul spirit of unity with an early morning walkathon. Participants are also joining hands to launch an international organization called the Global Saemaul Development Network.
The organization has been launched to help people in poverty around the world by sharing the Saemaul spirit, nurturing leaders, exchanging information, and implementing projects.
This will help spread Korea's Saemaul-undong across developing nations, helping them tackle poverty and make better lives for their people. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News, Gyeongju.
Now for international headlines, we turn to our Bruce Harrison at the News Center.
Today's focus, a new front opens in the European refugee crisis. The U.S. warns Russia over military support in Syria, and Facebook plans a new feature, the long-awaited dislike button.
Bruce, but now that Hungary has locked down its border with Serbia, where are refugees turning?
Well, Ji-hye, some are heading west to Croatia in an attempt to reach the European Union. Around 100 refugees, mostly Syrians, arrived in eastern Croatia this morning. They traveled west by bus and made the final approach to the border on foot. Croatian police said the refugees would be registered and transported to reception centers in towns in central Croatia.
We just want to pass. We don't want anything. There's war in our countries, killing, bombing, everything. You can't stay.
From the centers, it's less than 100 kilometers to Slovenia and Europe's border-free Schengen zone. Many hope to cross Slovenia into Austria and on to Germany. More than 1,000 refugees remain at the Hungary-Serbia border, many applying for asylum, others trying to illegally breach a wall along the southern frontier. Under new rules, those caught could be imprisoned or deported. The White House has cautioned Russia against building up its military force in Syria. Officials held a press briefing in Washington after Russian President Vladimir Putin said he'd continue to provide military support to Syrian President Bashar Assad in his fight against the Islamic State. Spokesman Josh Earnest said Washington would prefer to see Moscow engage more constructively with the 60-member coalition. Earnest said the U.S.-led coalition is focused on degrading and ultimately destroying IS. The U.S. State Department says Secretary of State John Kerry has called his Russian counterpart several times to clarify the intent of Moscow's military buildup in Syria. Kerry said continuous aid to Assad will only escalate the Syrian conflict. Moscow claims it's put military experts on the ground to help Syria fight ISIS, but the U.S. believes Russia wants to establish a forward operating airbase in Syria. Watching the number of likes mount on a Facebook selfie is a source of pride for many people. But what about dislikes? Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg has announced the social media site is working on an alternative to the like button. Zuckerberg said the new option would be tested soon and it would allow users to express empathy.
Because, we didn't want to just build a dislike button because, we don't want to turn Facebook into a forum where people are voting up or down on people's posts, right?
He said the anticipated feature allows a broader range of emotions to be expressed, especially when it's bad news being shared. The dislike button already exists on the web. People have been casting thumbs down on YouTube videos for years, but with no indication of empathy. Those are tonight's stories. See you tomorrow.
We had another beautiful day here in Seoul today, but people in the southern regions were under a mix of clouds and rain, with similar conditions still prevalent in some parts of the southern coastal regions. And the eastern coastal areas of Gyeongsang-do province will receive the most amount of rainfall tomorrow, up to 40 millimeters. And likewise, southern parts of Jeollado province will see rain until dawn, while the Gyeongsang-do and Gangwon-do regions will see precipitation until mid-afternoon, but elsewhere we'll see sunny skies throughout the day. So it's going to be another beautiful day here in Seoul and Gwangju, with the daily highs getting up to 27, and Daegu and Busan will be topping out at 23 and 24. And as for the other regions, Daejeon and Jeju Island will see a high of 27 and 24, while Dokdo rises to 18. No rain is in the forecast for the time being here in the capital. It's just going to be lots of sunshine throughout the week, with highs hovering just above this seasonal average throughout the week. Well, that's all for Korea, and here's international weather for viewers around the world.
And we've come to the end of our newscast. As always, thank you for staying with us.
We'll be back same time tomorrow. Goodbye for now.